Um, so we have a pretty small group here, so feel free to come a little bit closer. And because of the type of the topic and the size of the group, I strongly encourage you to interrupt and ask your questions, bring your ideas, or just let's have a discussion about that. It will be much more interesting than just me talking about open source versus SaaS. Okay, let's try if the technology works. It may be too late, but I'm pretty happy that this effect works. New experiment with Keynote. So that's it. We can go home. We know that there is a kind of a war between open source and SaaS, and I think most of you may know my story, but just to bring something closer to this thing about the war between open source and SaaS. I'm in this e-commerce technology world for quite a long time, since 2008. And that was the time when, together with Maciek, we switched from general web development and creating all magic custom stuff, and we decided to go towards e-commerce. So that was a lot of different adventures, mostly with an open source e-commerce platform starting with letter M, and mostly recognized as a very orange product. But what's really interesting, over time, there was a strong but unusual competition between Magento and Shopify. I don't know why, because they were totally different products targeting different groups. But I remember one Shopify conference when they were giving away stickers with just 2 words: "Die Magento." So I assume that at least at that time, SaaS was trying to overtake Magento and its position on the market. So yeah, for over years, my company was working primarily with Magento, focusing a lot on open source. But over years, we also changed. For years, I was an evangelist, promoting Magento and open source in general all over the world. That's how we met many times with Ben Marks, what he was doing for Magento. Officially, I was doing for Meet Magento Association. But a lot has changed. Yeah, that's how the ecosystem, the e-commerce technology ecosystem looks like in 2008. When Magento 0.8 first arrived on the market, it was a huge revolution. It was a completely new level of technology. Like it was amazing thing that nobody could really believe that there is such a great e-commerce system compared to Zencart and Oscommerce that were dominating the market at that time. So the big orange quickly dominated everything. Like from difficult, complex PHP system, it became #1 platform around the world. So that was the early stage, and for many years it stayed like that. But our situation right now is completely different. If we like it or not, there is no domination on the market. I was always surprised that for years there was no strong competition for Magento. It's really something I'm surprised that it took a lot of time to create a competition that will provide at least similar set of features. But right now, in 2023, the market is completely different. There is no one dominating technology. Of course, everyone tries to do that, but definitely it's different. And in the last 2 years, I have to say that I was almost sure that open source is actually losing the ground to SaaS, that it's ended, that soon that we have no future for open source. Of course, all the open source systems were still strong, but the interest in those solutions were just decreasing. So my opinion was, yeah, that in few years we will have no open source. It will be only SaaS. But actually, in the last year, we can see another trend that shows that actually it's not that open source is dead. It means that the market is more equalized now, that we have more solutions that are sometimes similar, sometimes complementary, that they are offering something pretty similar, but in this time in a different way. So those dots are covering different fields of the market, but definitely they are somehow existing in the same space. So you can see that right now there are so many names, and you know this list is just a small part, you know, like just showing the most popular platforms, and they are all working in different formats. They are offered on different licensing. It's sometimes very complex even to understand the type of licensing or pricing in those systems. Some have closed source, some have open source, some have very different variations even within one product. And in most cases, this is something that is like a Bible for most of the e-commerce, so the Magic Quadrant from Gartner. And even here we can see that right now all different types of platforms are considered as important for big enterprise e-commerce. It's not only open source, it's not only SaaS, it's not only PaaS or whatever else we would like to think about. There are a lot of players. So even if we think that some of that is just marketing, we can see that both closed source and open source are equally important right now. And the same we can see not only among leaders, but also visionaries. So I didn't really check, and I don't know very well some of those platforms, but at least those that we know from a daily work, we know that they are all pretty strong, and they deserve that spot. And of course, life is more complicated than just SaaS versus open source. So this is the most important thing, that topic of my presentation is a big simplification. That it's just something that is offered as a service and something that it's open sourced, and we can do whatever we like. Starting from a very simple thing, even open source may be just a free open source or paid open source. And it's very often used in exchange, what may be confusing. And to make it more confusing, we have so many different options. That it can be on-prem, it can be in cloud, it can be open source, closed source, it may be software as a service, platform as a service. It may be composable or maybe not composable. It may be microservice architecture in the cloud. It may be microservice architecture not in the cloud. Free, paid, different type of licenses, all different types of software. And what is even more funny, there are different combinations of all those features. Yeah, so just for another simplification, to compare, I would like to focus on few different, on couple the most popular combinations. So we have on-prem open source, something that we have full control. It's on our hosting. We know the code. We have the full control over it. And we have software as a service with some annual license. For this, to compare, I think about open source in their free versions, because when we start thinking about license versions, it's complicating it even more. So for now, it's more about on-prem free open source and software as a service. So how to compare? I would like first start with something that is often used in marketing communication, that scalability. You know, whoever is doing marketing will be using this term for their own, that we have the most scalable solution. And you can just sign every platform under this phrase. Everyone will say that they have an endless scalability and flexibility. And it has just different meaning for software as a service, and different meaning for open source. And in both cases, it's the biggest advantage of the platform solution, but it's also one of the biggest threats or disadvantages. Because the way we think about flexibility, it may help a business, but it may also drag every business to the bottom. Because flexibility sometimes means that we can do something, but very often it also means that we shouldn't do that, only that because we can. So let's look at the costs of different approaches. This is like a very simple graph, how we can calculate total cost of the ownership. What we have to combine to really understand how much the solution will cost. So of course we have development, we have some like a basic development, we have some add-ons that will enrich this the platform. We have integrations, and we have some one-time fees for something. This is like a initial part, and those both initial costs and ongoing costs are actually the same for SaaS or for on-prem platform. There is just a different priorities and different weight of those elements. So the same with ongoing costs. We have infrastructure, we have license, transactions, maintenance, marketing, and some unexpected costs wherever they occur. And if we think about this, it really depends on the type of the project, how the weight moves from one side to the other. And just for a simple example, in most cases, the very basic platforms we compare could be like Shopify and, for example, Magento. But we can also compare Sylius and commerce tools, or BigCommerce and Sylius. And in every single case, it will be a completely different scenario. Because SaaS doesn't really mean that it has to be a box, that we take just everything from this box, add a couple puzzles, and we have a fully ready platform. But this is exactly the same with open source. Like if we compare Magento and Sylius, there are different tools. They are offering different type of services and solving different challenges and different problems. And if we think about it, the development cost, the initial development cost for SaaS may be exactly the same or even bigger than for some open source solution. If we think about solutions that have a lot of features that are ready out of the box, and solution that is created to be a solid core, but requires adding everything on top of that, then the weight of the investment will move from the left to the right, depending on the needs. So, like I said about flexibility and scalability, that's one thing. But also, like the initial costs may be low or high for both approaches, depending on the project, depending on the scale and on the even type of the platform. So that only shows that just a simple comparing of that is super difficult without thinking about a special case. So we have all like a set of different elements that are considered, that should be considered when choosing different approach, with licenses, with SaaS, with cloud, with open source. We have costs, and as I showed you on the previous slide, and it doesn't have to be a main differentiation. The cost may be very similar. We have something called a vendor lock-in. We usually think about vendor lock-in like something that it's only in a service. That if we have a big commerce account and we run a store there, we have a solid vendor lock-in. But there are also a different point of view, that if we have a system that is very flexible, that we can create everything around it, that it ends like a system with a core e-commerce feature, but everything else is custom. And then the vendor lock-in may be exactly the same or even worse on the open platform. So that's easy from one side, that SaaS will always be more locked in, but in situations where it becomes a very custom around the core open source, it may be exactly the same situation. We have something like a data sovereignty. So that's also a thing that evolved over years. In early SaaS offerings, there was absolutely zero control. But when we think about some more advanced SaaS offerings, there are options of choosing the regions or ways how data is stored and how it's secured. So again, it's a little bit more problematic in closed source SaaS solutions, but in the same time, it's not always the case. Transparency. Transparency is definitely an important element here, because in closed source, there is no way to see what's happening there. Then we have to trust the provider. But in every project, everyone has to trust someone. So it's not like having the open source and full control over that. It's always easy to keep that transparency. But this is definitely a point for a more controllable solution. Scalability, I already mentioned that before. That with scalability, for some open source solutions, it's easier, but also for some cloud SaaS solutions, it may be easy. Scalability has also different meaning for different businesses. Because when we promote endless scalability, it's always good to remember that only few business need this kind of endless scalability. Most of the business, even from the upper mid-market, they have some business limitations, and they don't need this kind of unlimited scalability. It's just too much for them. So the scalability is more important in terms how easy it is to scale. And we already had some presentations today knowing that it's easy to scale with open source. Yes, that's true, but we also know the stories from other systems that are less scalable. So that's more difficult in different platforms. Time to market. Time to market was very often a deciding factor. That with SaaS, it was super easy to build something quickly and launch. And of course, in the typical Shopify case, that's true. But if we think about more complex solution built on enterprise SaaS, time to market may be even longer than on open source. Because of some limitations of the platform, there is more work involved around the core to launch it. Custom requirements, that was usually the most important factor to choose open source, that we can create anything we like on open source. But if we go too far with custom requirements, we go to the second element, to vendor lock-in, because if it's all becomes custom, then very often there is one important question: do we still need any platform? Because if we modify everything, then it means that it's not an open source platform anymore. It's more like a super custom solution. So for custom requirements, that's also related with this scalability and flexibility I mentioned before. That sometimes limitations of SaaS is a good thing, because limitations create some boundaries, and they help sometimes limit ideas to go beyond and just invest in technology without any limits. And I'm trying to think from the business perspective, because of course from the technology provider perspective, system integrator, for us it's way better to work with open source. You know, like whatever idea comes from the business, we can do it. We have no limitations. But the problem is that especially now, when we have a slowdown in e-commerce, those limitations are more and more visible. And sometimes it's super risky to follow all the requests from the business without really thinking about it. Because sooner or later, every budget has some limitations. And if we don't find those boundaries early enough, then the client, business, may get into trouble. And if they get into trouble, of course, the system integrator, software provider, will follow. It will be the same consequences. So that's the custom requirements. They are easier to apply in open source, but at the same time, it's way more risky. And another one is a service level agreement. That's something I would say it's more and more important on various levels, especially in this upper mid-market enterprise segment. And that's where SaaS have some serious advantage, that there is one company behind it, who can be a warrant that this solution is stable. It's really doing something what we are expecting all the time. When we are talking about open source, if it's like a free open source or paid open source, in most cases, it's modified. It's not like a clean open source we take from the box and we just use it like that. It's heavily modified because we have no limitations. We can modify everything. And because of that, it's much harder to have an SLA from a platform provider. So this is something that is really worth considering. I think that's important for both Sylius or other platform providers to think how to solve that problem to compete with SaaS solutions. Because we know that it's impossible to provide a solid SLA if something is super custom. Nobody can just help fixing the code that is already totally changed, and it's far from the original one. So this one is a really important element to consider for all platform providers. That are ready for competition. And my favorite here, tech maturity. That's something that, as a team, we observed over years. That in business, there are a lot of ideas how to use the best tools, how to get advantage using technology. But the problem is that many people, they don't want to understand technology. They believe that technology will do magic by itself. That was the reason why we had that bubble growing, that a lot of money was flowing into the tech development because business just believed that this technology will just increase sales, do magic without anything. And that's the element, I would say, is one of the most important in correlation with custom requirements to choose between platforms. Because even the biggest client, if there is no tech maturity and really willing to learn and understand technology, then they should have some limitations. If there are no limitations and no understanding, it will bring troubles. And usually troubles sooner than later. This part is not very often mentioned, yeah? But I think it's because, again, we as service providers, we are okay with just developing more and more features. Yeah? It's like that's what we are paid for. But someone on the client side should be the one who can pull the brake and say, hey, stop. It will not change anything that we will invest another 500,000 in technology if we don't change some other processes. But if there are no limitations, very often it's hard to explain why we shouldn't do that, because that's how it works. So this is something that I really like to repeat, that for every client, it doesn't matter how big it is. It's super important to understand if they will see the differences between being responsible for own technology, for open source, for self-hosted tools, or they believe that it will be like easygoing and self-maintaining system because it was so expensive. So it will be just running like that without problems and doing everything on its own. And connected to that is also something like related to security. Security in terms of hosted SaaS solution or open source means something completely different. In open source, we really have to take care of the security on our own. And that comes back to this tech maturity, because I think that most of you who knows this ecosystem of open source project had some situations that investor client refused to make some updates to the code because it's less important than some new marketing features. And this is related very closely to tech maturity, because if business doesn't understand the responsibility they have over their own code to take care about security, to take care about the tech debt, they shouldn't have open source platform, because they have a tool that is way too advanced and too dangerous for them. Because without really understanding all the responsibilities coming with open source, they can create a risk for the business. And that's one of the reasons where they should do something with the platform that, again, will do that for them. Will have some limitations. Okay, some of you may say that, okay, there is a service provider who will do it for the client. Okay, but at some point, we don't want to have this vendor lock again. And if client itself cannot handle all the responsibilities, but is waiting only for service provider to do that, that's definitely not the way how the open source advantages should be used. So all those elements are just showing that it's much more there are more nuances. They're just cost or time to market or flexibility. When choosing a different approach between different platforms, it's also about the business. It's about their understanding and their readiness for using open source or for using SaaS. Yeah, so there are like elements that are super important here. Understanding this dependency on vendor or service provider. Understanding what's happening with the data, how it's independent, and how we can really know what's happening with that. Transparency of the solution, and tech maturity. If we simplify the previous list to those 4 elements, I think in most cases, they can answer if the project should have a full control over everything and is capable of doing that, or it's better to go in different direction and use something that someone else by design is taking care of. So that's a little bit more about the previous points. Yeah? So like legal requirements, data storage, security, understanding differences, ownership of the platform, which is tricky. Sometimes in SaaS we may have a more ownership than in open source. And the ownership of the platform, we have some examples from the Polish market, that it's not really related to SaaS but to closed source. Yeah? That when using closed source, nobody really thinks what may happen in one of our competitors will invest or take over the SaaS solution provider. Yeah, that's a very unlikely situation, but it happened in Poland. And a lot of merchants just landed in trouble. So but this also may happen with a service provider. It's just a different scale when it happens to SaaS or closed source provider because of lack of the transparency of the solution. So if the competitor takes over the solution provider and we cannot really verify what's happening in the code, that's super dangerous. So ownership of the platform and tool, and data access. That's very interesting. How important is who has access to our data? In last few days, we had a news about Shopify launching their global supermarket. So every Shopify store can be part of this marketplace. So it's like a competition to Amazon. This is good and bad, because for smaller businesses, it's a huge opportunity that the clients can look for their products when browsing across thousands of stores. But it's also a big risk for some bigger brands. Yeah, very often they don't want to be compared to some others, to smaller merchants who are offering maybe similar product in much lower price, but offering it with less additional services. So how the platform providers are using this data and what they can do with that is a challenge. Sometimes it's not relevant. Sometimes it's still better to use something provided and closed because it will give something else, easier time to market, or just a safer approach to e-commerce. But sometimes it may be a big risk. And the role of the in-house IT department, that's the tech maturity. But not always. Sometimes the in-house IT team is also a team that creates a big risk for e-commerce. That's actually a very common situation where a company that has a pretty big IT team decides to go open source because they have own people and they can do everything. And the problem is that, of course, they can do everything, but not in this technology. And because of that, it creates a huge problem for the whole business and for the whole technology. So tech maturity is about understanding also problems with technology. Also understanding that if we have a team, an in-house team for developing infrastructure, it doesn't mean that the same team can be used to develop the full e-commerce solution. So where we are heading, of course, I can only guess. As I told you at the beginning, I thought that we are really going into SaaS world, and open source is not something that we can go into the future. But right now I have a slightly different opinion. So definitely what's changed in the last couple of months, and I think that almost everyone noticed that e-commerce technology changed from a developer-centric, from just building technology for a technology, to business-centric. All new projects, they are much more careful in choosing technology, in choosing different solutions. And it doesn't matter if it's a SaaS or it's an open source self-hosted solution. It's all about business. Because of the competition, because of the selection of the tools on the market, it's much more difficult to offer a solution that will be super expensive and offering maybe endless capabilities if they are not really needed for the business. So I think that this is an important thing for all e-commerce platforms and for all agencies building solutions on open source, to understand that right now we have to focus more and more on business needs, and don't think just about the perfect code or perfect technology solution to do everything, because technology by itself will not do magic, will not sell more. It's the merchant and their customer service, their business idea, which is actually selling. And the technology, doesn't matter what type of technology, is just supposed not to create obstacles in this process, just to make it smooth. And the best technology ever will not do anything without people, business people behind it. Definitely there is a big opportunity in all low-code, no-code solutions. And when low-code and no-code is definitely something that is more and more developed in SaaS, also in developing open source solutions, we will rely more and more on generative AI. Because the previous years were full of repeating tasks. We were developing very similar solutions over and over again. And that was, of course, creating an enormous cost. That's also one of the reasons why open source was going down, because it became super expensive. Everything had to be built on top of open source and create a huge costs for sometimes very, very simple tasks. Like, I'm pretty sure that almost everyone heard something like, okay, but why you have to spend 200 hours for a simple feature that the other other SaaS system has already built in? It's super easy. Why it's going to be so expensive? And when we think about it, we should ask the same question. Yeah, why it's so expensive? It's so simple. It's on the market for years. So low code and no code, this is the way, if we like it or not. It will not be pretty. We can make it as good as needed, but making a perfect solution just to have a perfect solution is never a way. Is never a solution. So better and better tools for helping us creating the right tools. This is the future. And what we can see is that every platform is trying to take as much market as possible. But I think that one change is for good. That even if e-commerce is growing, maybe slower than before, but it's growing. But this cake is still one piece, and having more platforms on the market, we have to accept that every platform will have a smaller share. And if it's Magento, if it's Sylius, if it's Commerce Tools or Shopify or WooCommerce, they have to somehow maneuver and have their own piece of cake. Of course, everyone would like to be one one solution to rule them all. Yeah, but that's not the way. We need competition because competition is actually empowering innovations. If we'll have one player, even if it's the best one, if we can imagine that Shopify will take over everything and go from 10% to 60, I don't know. It's really bad for the market because of course it will be super handy at the very beginning, but it takes us in a completely different direction. It takes us actually to the situation we know from China, that there are almost no individual stores. Everything is marketplaced. If you want to sell something, you go to few of the global marketplaces. It's all on social, it's all on marketplaces. Creating own brand and having full control over that is super difficult. So if we would have the same here, like a very dominant player taking over everything, it would be just bad for the market. And in open source, we can see taking a lot of experience from the previous SaaS platforms. We can see a lot of mixed models, mixing open source and different services that are just in the cloud. So those hybrids will be more and more common, because the core is to understand what is the most important for every business. If some store needs a, I don't know, bidding feature, they should focus on creating a perfect or as good as needed bidding element, but then the rest can be used from generic system. It can be a SaaS, it can be anything. So it's about choosing what is really important and where those custom requirements are critical for the business. Because if we try to have custom requirements for everything, that's just expensive, time-consuming. But defining where is the core value of the business and focusing on customizing that part, that creates a completely new dimension. We can combine different versions. We can combine SaaS, open source, PaaS in various combinations. So this balance between solutions is also important. What we can see now, coming back to open source, is caused because the peak of SaaS solutions created an increase in licenses. So something what was promised as a super cost-efficient solution right now becomes more expensive. So a lot of merchants who decided to go to expensive SaaS solutions, they decide that right now it's time to go back and go back to the open source that previously looked too expensive. But now with new experiences, they can have a fresh approach. So those migrations between platforms will happen. It's not like someone is moving from Shopify to Sylius, or from Sylius to Shopware, or from Shopware to commerce tools. That's a natural movement because also companies evolve. They may also have different needs over time. And something that worked for a company in 2023, it doesn't have to be the key element in 2028. So even thinking about the average lifetime of the e-commerce technology, 3 to 5 years, it's not that bad to move between different approaches because it also increases know-how inside every e-commerce business. So that's mostly it from my side. The final thought, of course, it depends. What is better? I think we are getting to the point, to the moment where the balance between different solutions is better and better. And if the implementation will be cheaper, faster, more efficient, depends less on the technology, more on the people behind it, on both sides, on the business and on the implementation. So that's all from my side. Have any questions, ideas? I don't know how much time we have before the closing session. I would say that platform as a service is a way to go, because it's something that creates this balance. It takes some responsibility from merchant. It's a platform. Someone takes care of that, but at the same time keeps the openness of the open source code. I would come back to my previous slide about generative AI. So I think less and less development, because as much as I love developing code, I used to be a programmer, maybe not the best, but I used to be. I think that we cannot just do everything by hand, and people has to focus on more advanced stuff. We shouldn't build the same features over and over again. So generative AI and creating a high quality code that will be actually responding to our requirements, that's the way to go. And I think that to succeed, we all should focus on that. How to use those tools, how to make them better, and how to learn, how to tell them what to do, because that will be the challenge. And right now, it's a challenge. We know that trying to define what we want to do is usually one of the biggest tasks in building custom features. And if we want AI to do it for us, then we have to learn how to create the right question. And the third one, I think it will be challenging to keep the open source like it is, because of this real value, and because we cannot magically educate every business people in technology pros and cons. So that's one of the biggest problems, I think, that using open source, in my opinion, is related to responsibility inside the business, and that may be a problem, because the best project, if it's just treated without this responsibility, will become a huge problem for a company. So I would say thinking how to create the right education and the right onboarding for clients who would like to have this kind of control, but they are not ready for that yet. That's super important, but that's just an idea. Any more questions? Okay, so I think like we are staying here waiting for the closing session. Thank you.